like that.
Let's just leave it.
There's going to be a slide up.
Oh, okay, great.
Welcome, everyone, to the Palo Alto Council of PTA's School Board Candidates Secondary Forum for the November 5th, 2024 general election. My name is Rebecca Scholl, and along with Alpa Shah, we represent both Gunn and Pally's PTA Parent Education Coordinators. Please remember, this forum is looking at the lens of secondary education in the Palo Alto Unified School District, which includes middle and high school. Thank you to MidPenn Media for bringing this event to our audience on Zoom. This forum's recording will be posted to our YouTube channel along with being aired on MidPenn's channel. Please note that whenever this recording is aired, it is to be shown in its entirety to ensure that no candidate statements are used out of context. All candidates have agreed to this. Our moderators today are Holden Lee and Sam Laxman, representing both Pally and Gunn High School speech and debate clubs. I will now turn the forum over to them.
We will be moderating this session, which will include 1-minute opening statements by each candidate. Then we'll ask previously solicited questions in a randomly determined order, with candidates having 1 minute to respond. We'll end with 1-minute closing statements.
Tonight, you will hear from 5 candidates who are running for the 3 open positions on the Palo Alto Unified School Board. The candidates in alphabetical order are Orina Chu, Nicole Chu Wong, Chris Colohan, Allison Kamai, and Josh Saltzman. We will now begin with opening statements. You will each have 1 minute. We will start with Ms. Chu.
Good evening. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Rowena Chu. I'm the parent of 4 children in PAUSD. I have a 1st grader and a 4th grader at Ohlone, a 7th grader at JLS, and a 10th grader who was at Pally last year and is now in middle college. My professional background is as a management consultant for firms such as Accenture, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and McKinsey, and I now work as a developmental economist at the World Bank. The 4 priorities I run on are every child must grow, which I interpret to be differentiation in the classrooms, helping struggling kids and accelerated kids. I also have an emphasis on mental health, on special education, and I advocate for greater transparency in the district.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
My name is Nicole Chu Wong. I am the parent of 2 PAUSD students. My youngest goes to Preschool Family, which is the preschool program run through the district at Greendale, through the adult school, of which I am a student. And I have a 1st grader who's in Mandarin Immersion at Ohlone. I'm also the executive director of an educational equity nonprofit where we provide an after-school enrichment, community building, social emotional learning, and targeted academic support for almost 200 socioeconomically disadvantaged middle schoolers at all 3 middle schools right here in PAUSD, as well as providing sustained service learning opportunities for almost 200 PAUSD high school students, as well as other local high school and college students. I'm also the co-president of the Chinese Parents Club, and in addition to understanding all the levels of education from my personal and professional background, I also have the support of multiple teachers, as well as the Classified Staffs Union right here in PAUSD called CSEA.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
First off, I just want to say thank you so much to our moderators tonight. This is awesome. My name is Chris Colohan, and I'm running for Palo Alto School Board. 8 years ago, I left a successful career as an engineering manager at Google to become a stay-at-home dad for our kids. And I dove in right away, and I'm like, how can I help in our schools? And I tried to help in our schools in every way I could. I signed up as a PTA board member. I've been on 2 different PTA boards for the past 7 years, both as 5 years as a treasurer and also 2 years as a PTA co-president during the pandemic. I also have dressed up as Doobie the Dragon and danced around for our kids and done other fun things. But for the past 2.5 years, I've worked as a substitute teacher. Maybe even taught some of your kids. I've taught mostly music and math in every grade level from kindergarten straight through to grade 12 in all 17 of Palo Alto schools. So I bring to this role a wealth of experience as a parent of 2 kids in the district, as a substitute teacher, as a PTA leader, and also as an experienced manager, and hope to earn your vote.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for listening in. I'm Allison Kamai. I'm running for school board. I do immigrants' rights policy, my day job, and through that work, I've learned all change is local. I am here first and foremost as an engaged parent. I have a daughter at Green Middle School, so I've been in the district for a long time, and also have a son in kindergarten, so I'm looking at 13 more years. I served on an ad hoc school board committee a couple years ago on childcare, working to expand aftercare options in our district. I also worked to co-found a position on gun violence prevention at the Palo Alto PTA Council. I'm also here as an experienced attorney. I started my career representing kids, many of them in high school here in Santa Clara County, and come from both a child protective but also child empowerment perspective. So want to both protect our kids but make sure our youth have the tools to advocate for themselves. I have 3 campaign priorities: academic opportunities for all, safety broadly defined, and increasing trust in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, we have Mr. Saltzman.
Hi, I'm Josh Saltzman, and I'm running to be a trustee of the Palo Alto School District because I believe every student deserves an opportunity to thrive. I have 3 kids with very different needs, both in and out of the classroom. I have a 10th grader at Gunn, an 8th grader at Synapse who will go to Gunn next year, and a 3rd grader at Nixon who wears hearing aids and is on the autism spectrum. I earned degrees in biology from Princeton and design from Pratt, and after founding 2 education technology startups and a career in product design, I became a full-time parent. Over the last 6 years, I've been a class parent, PTA board member, and a site council member. I know my way around a classroom and a budget spreadsheet. And thanks to my experience in design and business, I've learned how to look at things from many perspectives, build consensus, and solve problems creatively. My priorities include promoting both excellence and equity, building a culture of trust and transparency, and making sure our students feel safe, supported, and included. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move on to the first question. You'll have 1 minute to respond. First, what, in your opinion, are the main causes of mental health and wellness challenges for secondary school students and teachers, and how can the district best address these causes? We will start with Mr. Colahan.
So this is a big question to answer in 60 seconds. I would say the main cause of mental health issues is, well, stress. It's the pressures that our kids are under in order to perform at the highest level in our schools. I've actually seen this in the classroom. I've seen kids get stressed out. I've been at the challenge days, which we offer in our middle schools, and had kids completely losing it about the stress that they're under to do everything and to excel at everything. And so what can we do to address this? Well, it's a combination of things. It's not just a school problem, it's a community problem. And so we as a community need to come together and to learn how to give our kids an outlet, a chance to relax. We need to give them, of course, the supports that we have been giving them in the schools, such as the wellness centers and all of the professionals that we have working in our schools. But we need to make this a priority and to just work on helping our kids have less pressure on them.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
Thank you. So I think that the mental health strain comes from a couple different places. One are expectations that our kids are putting on themselves, also from that they are receiving from community expectations, and also peers and social media. And I think that the way that we have to address this is a 2-pronged approach. I think it is a community issue, and so we need to be engaged in community-wide solutions where we're working with the city, where we're working with partner organizations, and also where we're working with our youth to hear meaningful input on how to relieve the stress that folks are feeling. I understand there's a survey that folks are filling out, but only about 50% of folks fill them out, and not everyone fills it out honestly. So how can we get meaningful input from students about how to address this in a more significant and systemic way?
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
From my experience in both the middle schools and the high schools, I've seen mental health and wellness issues generally related to 2 primary causes. The first being academic stress and pressure, and the second being social. And while I believe that we need to start working on this much earlier when our children are much younger through social emotional learning and teaching them to be responsible consumers of social media, teaching them to have healthy relationships, and also teaching our parents what is and what is not age appropriate, as well as trying to reduce the pressure in every way we can. For the purposes of secondary, I think we're already doing a lot, and we need to promote what is being student driven, because I think that's the most important thing we can do is support our students. We just had YCS produce an event over the weekend called Beyond the Books. We had the student body at Pally did a wonderful job partnering with the Asian American Foundation to start intergenerational conversations. We need to do more of that, as well as find a way to help our students have healthy boundaries and healthy relationships so that we can address those two root causes of mental health issues.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
Thank you. I do quite a bit of global advocacy work around the area of youth mental health, and I want to point to a few causes which are, I think, universal youth mental health and also would relate to Palo Alto. I think the first thing I want to say is often the causes for mental health difficulties are far more deep-rooted than those on the surface or those that might be apparent to both parents and teachers and peers. And therefore, I think in terms of addressing mental health in this district, that we have to go back to who is this person, what is their background, what are the stresses, what are the cultural stresses and the deep-rooted stresses in terms of what makes this person function. I think that there is an issue around students in this district being able to find their authentic self. They are indeed surrounded in a high-pressure, high-stress environment where they're expected to conform to very high expectations. And so much of the work that I would like to see done in this district is helping students here find their authentic self, the areas in which they want to thrive, rather than conforming to societal expectations. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we have Mr. Saltzman.
I want to address both parts of the question, both student stress and teacher stress. I think student stress comes a lot from use of technology, feeling like students have to fit into a mold that isn't necessarily appropriate for them. That may have to do with academics, that might have to do with social pressures, social media apps, and the whole culture around needing to have two different versions of oneself, one in the real world and one in these apps, I think places a lot of stress on students. And so I believe that if we can help them understand starting as early as possible in middle school and possibly even elementary school what the potential harms are that are done to them by these apps and these expectations, that's going to go a long way. As far as teachers and staff are concerned, I think a big source of stress has to do with whether they feel supported, valued, and whether they feel like their input is being taken into consideration when it comes to decision-making processes in the district.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the next question. Equity and closing the opportunity gap continue to be important issues in our district. What is your definition of equity, and how would you balance supporting the needs of all secondary school students? We will start with Ms. Chu Wong.
It's overused, but it's relevant, and I'll just save all the candidates from having to use the same analogy, because I've heard us all say it. It's the cartoon where you see the kids standing on boxes of different heights to be able to see over the fence to see the baseball game. That's what I view as equity. What I think we need to understand as a community is that oftentimes when you focus on the ways in which you can serve those students that have been historically marginalized, it's rising tides raise all boats. So the example I often use is that if you teach the majority of students to read the way you would teach a dyslexic student to read, studies show that it actually benefits the majority of students as well, obviously, as the student who's dyslexic. So I think we could all benefit from an understanding that equity is actually good for all, and an understanding that if you have to prioritize, because although we have a large budget, it isn't infinite, that you can focus on those things that maybe are designed to serve our historically marginalized and underrepresented and those experiencing the opportunity gap, and have faith that that will also serve all students.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
I think it's important to add to that. I do agree with the comments that my fellow candidate made, but I think it's important to add to that equity is not equality and that equity is not a zero-sum game. So let me unpack those statements. I think in terms of equity not being equality, it's important for the district to recognize that in order for every student to thrive, it is not the responsibility of the district to give each student the same experience, but to give each student the supports they specifically need to thrive. So in that case, equity for one child may look very different from equity for another child. For example, struggling students may require more specific support in the academic areas that they're struggling in. Equally, students that want to accelerate will need specific classes to allow them to do that. I believe the district should meet every child where they are at. And in that sense, I believe that equity may look very different for every child. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Saltzman.
I think this is a really important topic for us to consider for a number of reasons. Number one, in this district, we have an incredible diversity of students in terms of what they need and what their challenges are and what their interests are. And so I think that when we consider how best to support each of those students, how to help them thrive and grow, what we should be trying to do is figure out how to help them set ambitious but achievable goals for every year. And so that is, I think, like Ms. Chu said, a matter of figuring out where they're starting from, what their capabilities are, what their capacities are, what their challenges are, and how we can best support them so that they can make as much progress as possible in each year of school. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So in the classroom, I've seen this firsthand. I've seen that we have a wide range of students, both in their backgrounds and also where they're at. And we really need to find ways of supporting all of them. One place where I've seen this quite graphically is in when I've been subbing middle school math classes. But in terms of how to close the opportunity gap, this is an area where, honestly, I'm not the world-renowned expert on this. Actually, some of the other candidates are quite good at this, like Nicole Chuang. She literally has a degree in women's studies and studying these issues, and she knows this area really well. So I look forward to working alongside other people who can help me understand how to really solve this problem really well. And we need to close this opportunity gap between some of our students. Yeah.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ms. Kamai.
As someone who's represented immigrant youth in our county, I know that different obstacles that people may face, the wide variety of barriers that people may have in their home life before they even walk in the school door. And so I am committed, both through my values and also through my experience, to working to really achieve academic opportunities for all. As I mentioned, that's one of my campaign priorities, and in that I mean academic achievement and equity. How do we do that? I think two ways. First, we need ongoing substantial support for students that need it. And I know we're talking about secondary here, but identifying people who need it as early as possible. And then second, I think we need flexibility. So making sure that we are offering different types of opportunities for folks that meet them, that meet their desires, their interests, can help people grow, can help them thrive, and also form relationships with peers and teachers that can hopefully serve as further support in their life. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. How will you improve transparency with the community and increase secondary student, staff, and parent voices in the decision-making process? We'll start with Mr. Saltzman.
One of the recurring themes that I've heard when talking to parents and teachers on the campaign trail is that they sometimes feel as though their input is not welcomed by the school district, by the leadership of the school district. And I think that this is a problem of culture that we really need to address. I believe that everyone involved in this school, in the school district, has the right to feel respected, to feel like they are, like their opinions are valued, to expect follow-up on issues that they bring, issues of concern. So that's something that I feel really strongly about, and as a board member, I would ensure that we're holding everyone in the school district to that standard. So I think that that involves having different channels for people to provide feedback, but also mechanisms to follow up, and it's also a change in tone. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
This is another one of my campaign priorities is transparency, trust, and community. And that is between the district and the parents, community members, and teachers, staff, and students. So one of the things I did when I was first considering running for school board was start listening sessions with students in the district. And I was fortunate to hear from many different folks on a wide variety of issues, from robotics teams to sustainability to bike safety to math to middle school athletics. These are the types of ongoing dialogue that I would want to continue with students to make sure that we are hearing the experience of students. We are a lay board and are not taking the classes of the school district that the board oversees. And so I think that communication is really key to make sure that we're able to offer the guidance and the oversight that is appropriate, needed, and productive.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So this is an area where I can rely on my PTA experience, which is I got a reputation as a PTA leader in two ways. One is I was the guy who you can reach out anytime, talk to anytime, and I will listen, and I will hear you. And I won't always do what you want, but I'll at least make sure that you're heard very clearly. And also I got a reputation as a treasurer, as the guy who could take a budget presentation and turn it into the most fun and exciting and fun part of a PTA meeting. And I know this is weird, but it was actually deliberate because I think it's really important that people understand the most important decisions that are being made by an organization so that they can actually understand why those decisions are being made, and that increases trust in the organization. The other piece of this is we should, when we communicate with folks, do so in a timely fashion and not delay until we have just the perfect message, because often timely communication is much more important than perfect communication.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Ms. Chu Wong.
We have a large school district. We have many channels for communication, and I think there's a misunderstanding of what those channels are, and also of where is the best place to use your voice. For example, we have parents that come to the school board meetings and speak, which is wonderful because it is a big platform from which to speak on. But one, the school board meetings aren't accessible to all. They are not translated, and so some of our most marginalized parents cannot access this medium. And two, they are not a place for communication. And so sometimes it's awkward and feels bad sitting in the audience knowing that school board members cannot, because of the Brown Act, respond. So I think it's important to talk through what tools for communication we have to support our school sites and our teachers in being able to have conversations at school sites that should be there and bubble up as needed. But we need really strong leadership from the district in terms of communication, both reactive and proactive. And I agree with not waiting to have the perfect message, but rather saying this is where we're at. We may not be at the solution, but this is where we're going to go.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ms. Chu.
Thank you. Transparency is one of my campaign priorities also. And I would like to say that I've lived this value through my campaign. My campaign started by being supported by students, both very practically in terms of the things that were done for my campaign, but also in terms of my going out into the community and listening to students. Of course, having 4 kids through the district means that I have inroads into children at every level of this district. I think that I think what is important for transparency is that we are truly empathetic listeners, but also that we provide practical solutions to the things that we listen to. We need to be responsive to the very many diverse needs of this community, but at the same time be true to our values and principles, and that's often a juggle that's very difficult to manage. I would say about the district that it's important right now to reduce power distances. I've also been talking to parents, students, and teachers that feel disenfranchised, and I feel it's important to build community dialogue, to drive consensus, and to make sure that every voice, no matter how marginalized, feels like they have a place at the table.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next question. How can we challenge and support advanced learners while reducing the pressure many students feel to take advanced classes and create a culture that works for all secondary students? We'll start with Mr. Saltzman.
Thanks for this question. I've been having conversations over the last several days with students and parents and teachers, and all of them have talked about this issue. And so I think this is really important for us to think about and work on. One of the things I think is most important is for us to start conversations as early as possible with students to help them understand that there is no one right path for all students, that it is very reasonable to expect that different students will have different strengths and different interests. I don't necessarily think we need to, try to get all students to the same level by the time they graduate in all subjects. I think it's reasonable to expect that students will reach different levels in different subjects according to their abilities and interests. And I think normalizing that idea is one of the best things we can do in terms of helping students reduce that stress of comparing themselves to their peers.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Chu.
I think this is an incredibly important subject about challenging advanced learners and also reducing pressure on the majority of the student body. What I would echo Josh's remarks in the sense that I think that we as a district need to change our perceptions about excellence and how we get there. There are many paths to excellence in life. When students here leave the school district and move on to the wider world, there are many ways in which they can challenge themselves, they can arenas in which they can thrive, and ways in which they can find their authentic selves. I think if we offer students more opportunities to think about the varying ways in which they can succeed in the world, they can be true to themselves, we reduce this funnel effect of students thinking that there is one path to success and one way to success. That said, I do think that the few students who genuinely want to be challenged by academic acceleration should be specifically given the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Chu Wong.
I think there's two main things to this question, which is one, ensuring that the many accelerated options available to students are properly communicated. I recently was told by a parent that, well, they understood that they could take college level math at Foothill, which is an amazing community college. They were under the impression that their student wouldn't be able to use that class on their college application or submit that transcript because it wasn't on their PAUSD transcript. So we need to educate students that by opting to take a course at Foothill, they can use it and should use it when they apply to college. So that's one aspect, is that we already do offer, and to my understanding, if the teachers felt we needed to be offering more, the teachers would bubble that up and try to create a new class. Right now, we need to make sure that the opportunities we already offer feel accessible and appropriate. And then on the flip side, we need to make sure that we're incentivizing the right thing, which is for students to follow their interest. And right now, I've heard from many students who say, I wanted to take this class, but I couldn't because it wasn't AP, and I know I need that AP in order to get into college. So we need to open those pathways so they can do what they're interested in.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Kamai.
Thank you. So two things. I think rigor is not the same as workload. And so being very clear and looking at I know we've done a lot of work in the district over the last handful of years in reducing homework. And I know that has definitely happened at the middle school level and has been reduced by quite a bit at the high school level as well. I would want to take a specific look at our advanced classes and our AP classes to see about the workload there and how that's affecting folks' mental health. Second, I would want to make sure that we're celebrating successes really across the board. We're so fortunate in this district to have so many different opportunities for our students to pursue, whether it is in STEM, whether it is in language arts, whether it is in sports, whether it is in music and in theater, and really making sure our students feel encouraged and celebrated in all of the different ways that they can learn and that they can thrive, and then highlighting the different pathways. I think advanced pathways are very important, and making sure that we have clear communication to our students what they are, as well as support for struggling students. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Colohan.
So I think what we really need to focus on is, well, this question has two parts. One is, how can we support our advanced learners? And quite frankly, my experience in our schools, especially at the high school level, is we are already supporting the heck out of them in many ways. When I've been teaching in our upper level math classes, these kids teach me things, and I've got a PhD in computer science. So like, I know a lot of math, and yet I'm still learning things in these classes, which is amazing. We have a clay and glass studio. We've got amazing sports teams. We've got amazing set of opportunities for our students. And so then the question is how do we reduce pressure? And how we reduce pressure is by focusing on what we celebrate. We don't need to just celebrate success. We need to celebrate when our kids improve in things, when they develop a passion for a subject, when they learn how to love learning, which is something I want to spark in every one of our students. Quite frankly, that's because I'm a nerd. I get really excited about topics and I get really passionate about it. And I want to bring out the inner nerd in every one of our students because that's how they will grow and become amazing people.
Thank you. The next
Our next question is, how would you suggest helping Palo Alto middle school students be more prepared for the academic rigor of high school? We will start with Ms. Kamai.
Thank you. This is a question that comes up a lot, and one that I've been talking to teachers about and students and parents, as well as experts in curriculum. I think we're really lucky in that we're a unified district as opposed to many of the districts around us, and that we do K through 12 and beyond. So that means that we can sit together and take a systemic look at the way that we teach these curriculum across all of our grades. And I think that we can and should do a better job about thinking through how our middle school prepares for high school, and is there a jump there, and where's the rub? Where is it that it's harder for our students? Is it in the content? Is it in the idea that grades all of a sudden matter when you get to high school, even if we have a grace period during 9th grade? Is it that extracurriculars increase in high school, so that puts a pressure and a rub with homework? Is it that workload increases? These are all of the different factors that go into that jump that we should be taking a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So when I've looked into the issue of middle school to high school transition, I've been talking to teachers about this. And my conversations with the teachers actually sort of threw me for a loop, because I asked them, how often do you guys meet between the high schools and the middle schools, your curriculum committees and stuff, and coordinate and try and get this handoff to be as smooth as possible? Do you talk about the individual students and stuff? And the answer I get is largely, no, we don't actually have a structured way of doing this that happens with regularity. And I'm sure this happens some, but it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity to have this happen more. But in order for this to happen, we need to get our teachers in a place where they think they have the time and the bandwidth to do so. And a lot of our teachers feel overwhelmed by their current workload and their current demands. So we need, as a management organization, to try and figure out how do we get them the headspace and the room to do this handoff in a better manner and come up with better techniques for doing so.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Saltzman.
I agree that as a school district, unified school district, we do have the opportunity to try to unify our approach and come up with something that provides a better on-ramp to high school. And I also agree with the idea that the sources of stress, pressure, the changes that students experience are likely to come from many different angles. And so we do need to take all of those different angles into consideration. Social, academic, extracurricular, all sorts of different things. But I really would love to see us make sure that we're getting input from students. I think we have an amazing opportunity to survey our students, especially 9th graders, to ask them, what do you wish you had known before you got to high school? What would have helped you? And then hopefully we'll have some answers. But I think it would be good for us to be more thoughtful about this so that we have more of a ramp and less of a jump. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
Similarly to some of my fellow candidates, I've also been speaking to students at all of the school levels here, elementary, middle and high, and also parents who are concerned about the transition from one level to the other. I would say that being prepared for high school, for middle schoolers to be prepared for high school, they need to be ready in at least 3 different ways: academically, emotionally, and socially. I would say that academically, one of the things that we would like to look at is an evenness in the school system between middle school and high school. I've heard some concerns from parents and teachers about the curriculum at middle being unchallenging and therefore there being a big jump for high school. I think lots of people have heard about that. But I also want to speak about emotional and social readiness. When students go from elementary school into a big middle school, that is a very, that's a huge emotional challenge. But then when they go into 2 high schools that 3 high schools that we have here, they're often moving from a smaller campus to a much bigger campus. So I think we need to start preparing children emotionally much earlier, a buddy system between middle schoolers and high schoolers. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ms. Chu Wong.
Once again, I see both the social emotional aspect and the academic. On the social emotional front, I think we can do more in middle school to cut these large middle schools into smaller groups. Green, for example, did Challenge Day, and I got to be a volunteer adult participating in that. And those smaller groups provided increased empathy and sense of camaraderie and sense of working together. And that's, I think, part of getting them ready to then have support systems and have empathy for each other when they get to high school. In regards to preparing them academically, if we know on a whole that I've actually never had any one of our high school students tell me that they did not feel that there was pressure or stress at our high schools. I have, on the flip side, had parents tell me their children don't have stress, but I've never had their kids tell me that. And so rather than saying we've dumbed down middle school because they're not feeling as much pressure, we should ratchet it up so they don't hit a wall when they go to high school, I think we have to address things at the high school level so that there is a smoother transition, and certainly providing the support that students need through something akin to the Every Student Reads It initiative, but for middle school, that could help.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the next question. What is your position on math lanes and advanced course offerings in Palo Alto middle and high schools? Would you support increasing opportunities to move between lanes and/or bringing multivariable calculus back to high school campuses? We'll start with Mr. Colohan.
Wow, I could give a 45-minute talk on this one, and we got now 45 seconds left. So good luck with that. So at the middle school level, we had an old system, which was math lanes, and it had problems. And then we went to a D-lane system, and it has its own problems. And it also has some ginormous benefits. And so we need to find a solution that takes some of the best qualities of both systems. I actually sat down and chatted for a long time with some middle school math teachers recently, and they have all sorts of ideas on ways we can improve. So I want to support these teachers in finding ways to get us to implement some of those improvements to the current system so that we maintain the amazing benefits of the current system while also supporting the kids who it's not supporting as well. In terms of multivariable calculus, my 10-second answer to that is if the teachers want to teach multivariable calculus, I support that.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
So this comes to 2 of my campaign priorities. One is about academic opportunities for all. I think it is critical that we as a district are providing support for struggling students and also opportunities for our advanced kids within the Bell schedule. And second is transparency, that we're being very clear about what the options are that we offer. We have a skip test. When is the skip test? What are the expectations for the skip test? What does that pathway look like for folks? For laning, I think it's adequate placement is very important to be making data-based decisions about how we place our kids, the curriculum that we use, and also how are we moving folks either through their middle school curriculum as well as into their high school curriculum. For multivariable calculus, I know that there are a lot of folks who are looking for multivariable calculus as well as a lot of other advanced classes like AP US Government, fourth language classes, language classes, and I would offer them if the teachers bring them forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
I would not support relaning middle school math because just as in the case of everywhere that has laned math, what results is systemic racism, and I want to be really clear about that. It was no different in Palo Alto. So that is not the answer. What we have done currently, we've seen actually wonderful results with, and of course, it's not perfect. And so when we're ready, when we feel like we've gotten this current system underfoot and our teachers are ready, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to deliver any changes, and we have to make sure they already have very challenging jobs. We have to make sure they're supported and ready for more change. We should continue to iterate to close any gaps that still exist, but I think we're directionally going in the right way. As it relates to multivariable calculus, I too believe that if we have a teacher that's ready and willing and able and wants to teach it, that's a different discussion. But for right now, I want to be clear that it is an offering. While I have heard from parents that the class fills up at Foothill, I think that's something we can definitely address at Foothill to see if we can make sure that there'll be spaces reserved to ensure that our students have access to that course.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Saltzman.
Thank you. There is extensive research, I think, that shows that having lanes in middle school math leads to disparities in terms of the way that kids from different backgrounds are provided with opportunities, or in some cases prevented from having opportunities. And so I do think that the district had the right idea when it moved to a D-laned pattern. I think the challenge is that we now have a much wider variance in terms of the student abilities within a single classroom, and we don't yet have the support structures in place to address how we then support all of our students in those classrooms. So what I'm hoping we'll see as we continue on the path is some strategies that help us address that issue, whether that's additional classroom aids or technology, or some other strategies. As far as multivariable, I agree with basically the idea that everybody else has said, which is if we have demand and we have teachers, we should offer it.
Thank you. Finally, Ms. Chu.
My top campaign priority is every child must grow. So I am supportive, of course, of appropriate academic placement throughout the system, that we support both students and struggling and also students who are accelerated. My comments on laning and delaning is that in speaking to many parents and students and teachers about the controversy surrounding both, I think it is a complex issue, and I think there are pros and cons to both. I think with laning, problematically, is that it causes a fixed mindset in the sense that it is very easy for a student to start feeling they're either bad at maths or good at maths. And I think we want to get students out of this fixed mindset about their psychological relationship with mathematics. Of course, there are also difficulties with delaning, which we've heard from middle school maths teachers, in the sense that they are teaching a wide variety of skill sets in a classroom with many students. So I would say that in conclusion, I support transition between lanes because I'd like to come to a middle approach around fixed flexible grouping, where when students master basic skills, they can move on. Briefly, I do support the bringing back of multivariable calculus on campus. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, how do you propose to better support secondary students with special needs? We'll start with Ms. Chu.
In my advocacy work for the special needs community, when I was a PTA president in elementary school, I very much learned that parents of students with moderate severe needs felt very much that the district did not meet their needs on either a very practical basis in terms of legal compliance with those needs, and in terms of an emotional or societal need in terms of listening to what they thought their students needed. So I would say that this extends on to secondary education in the sense that families who feel marginalized and that their kids' needs are not being met, that gap only widens in secondary school. And I think that the way that the district can do a better job of listening to special needs families is by acknowledging that the parents in those families, who have often advocated extremely hard for their children, know best about what each of their children needs. And so I would go back to community consultation, community dialogue, and consensus building with the special needs community so that they can no longer feel, in the way that they do, diminished and marginalized. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Kamhai.
So I think that we can do a couple of things. One is we can be making sure that those needs are visible and met, and that we're hearing input from parents and students about what we can do. In high school, lots of times we're transitioning from intervention and assessment to accommodation, and making sure that we really are making sure that folks are getting the accommodations that they receive in as timely and transparent a way as possible. I've done many listening sessions with folks, and that it can be a real slog to get accommodations and services for our students and families who need them. And so I think that one thing we really need to do is try to be as responsive as possible as a district, as transparent as possible about what those processes look like, making sure information is available across the board, and hearing feedback, course correction about ways that we can improve those processes for as many families as quickly as possible.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Saltzman.
Thank you. When I've spoken recently to some parents of children with special needs at the secondary level. I've heard frustrations around the lack of transparency in the process. They frequently feel like it's a struggle for them to get their children the supports that they need. And so I think it's very important that if you are a parent of a child with special needs, that you feel like you know who to go to, what the process looks like, how to raise concerns if you have them, what the process is for following up, how to escalate concerns. All of those things I think are absolutely critical. And then I think as a district, we need to make sure that we have folks on staff who have expertise in the appropriate areas. There's a tremendous range of different needs that our students have, and we really need to make sure that we can accommodate that wide range of needs. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Chu Wong.
Well, I think that there's a lot that could be done to address special education, both in preschool special ed all the way through post-secondary special ed program that's currently located at Coverly. There are two things that I think would help students at all levels, and particularly in high school, and that is first, strength-based approach to IEPs. I recently went through a training talking about how we should be, the best practices to come from strengths. Instead of saying, this student is weak in this way and needs support, you say, this is where they thrive and where they do better, let's do more of this. And so if we can approach all of our students from a strength-based approach, I think that would be one way to better serve our high school students. Another thing I'd like to have at all levels, and particularly in high school, is focusing on how can we truly be inclusive. Merely having them mainstreamed and taking 40% or 80% or more of their classes with general education students is not enough. We need to think about the ways that we can adjust our classrooms and our culture and our behaviors to truly make it a space that welcomes them, because chances are it's actually probably good for a lot of students when you do things like that, like building in brain breaks, the ability to stand up, walk around, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Colohan.
So our secondary special education students are in this unique position where they've basically been subject to the past 10 years of special education changes and trends in special education in our country and in our district. And at our district level, we've seen a lot of changes in terms of management, direction, degrees of inclusion, approaches, and we subject our kids to all of this. And quite frankly, from talking to families, it sounds like there are definitely improvements, but there's been a lot of unclarity in management direction, and this has resulted in a lot of churn. It's resulted in a lot of staff turnover, and this is something which the board can address directly. We need to make sure that our special education programs have clear, consistent leadership in our district, that they are able to clearly communicate what their goals are and what they're doing to get there. And we need to do this by having regular presentations to our board about where we're at, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. And through the whole thing, as a board, we need to make sure that the entire thing keeps the focus on the experience of our students.
Thank you. Here's our next question. What are some possible policies to change the evaluation systems to be less stressful and more truthful to the abilities and understanding of students? And do you believe evidence-based grading is one such policy? We'll start with Mr. Saltzman.
So in theory, evidence-based grading, I think, makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I have heard about it that I think could be very helpful for students, for teachers, for parents, for everyone involved, is clarity around what the expectations are in a given subject. So if you're a student, you know what you need to master, what you need to learn, what skills you need to develop in order to succeed in that course. And so I think that that type of granularity and transparency is potentially very helpful. I think the way that evidence-based grading is currently being piloted, rolled out, adopted in our schools is a little bit haphazard, and I would like to see a little bit more of a structured rollout so that we can start with students at one grade level and then move on from there. I think it would be best to start in the middle school so that students aren't stressed out by changes in the way that their classes are being graded at the high school level. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
I'm generally supportive of evidence-based grading, and I'm encouraged to see that many of our teachers are also supportive of it, because we have to have them on board and able for that to be successful. And as it relates to grading or reflecting a student's progress and growth in a subject, when I think about middle school in particularly, I'm constantly wondering when I see students that have a difference in their grade versus things like their assessments and diagnostics, and I see that there's a differential, it points to a problem. It points to the fact that grades aren't actually a great indicator of whether a student is thriving. And so I ask myself, why in middle school would we have grades when it's not something that goes on a college transcript? I think we could lean into the JLS Connections model of narratives and what they do at Ohlone and really think about how are we actually going to get a gauge on how our students are doing, and oftentimes grades are not the answer.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
I agree that I think the evidence-based grading, the success of evidence-based grading is going to be very much correlated to the clarity and also transparency with which it's applied. I think that getting a very practical and clear rubric benefits both teachers and students. Whether or not the eventual grading process is based on academic factors or non-academic factors, it is a lack of clarity and lack of transparency that is currently causing confusion. My family also went through Ohlone Elementary School and JLS Connections, where students are often graded on a range of factors, not purely academic, but also classroom participation and the passion projects that they get involved with, both at an elementary and a middle school level. And I think that it gave the students an opportunity to shine outside of academic criteria. But if those projects are to play a part in their final grade, upfront clarity about those projects, what they entail, and how they may earn those grades is deeply important. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So the purpose of grades, there really are two purposes to grades. One is to give feedback to students about how you're doing, what are the kinds of things that you need to work harder on to get better at, right? The other purpose of grades is to provide an absolute evaluation. How did you do in this course? And it's not clear to me that a single rubric can achieve both of those goals, but here we are, we've got to put people on a single axis at the end of the year. And also, it's not clear to me that if we're in a position where, according to the spring's grading report, 80% of our secondary students are earning A's, we're actually achieving the second goal at all, because if everyone's an A student, then does that mean effectively no one's an A student because there's no differentiation? And so students are then feel pressure to do all sorts of other things in order to differentiate themselves. And does that add to stress? I don't know. But what I do agree with everyone else is that transparency, clarity, and consistency in our grading actually will significantly reduce stress because everyone knows what to expect.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ms. Kamai.
Although I'm a parent of somebody who's currently experienced evidence-based grading, it is not a system I was familiar with. So I've been doing a lot of homework, talking to teachers, talking to other students, and talking to educational experts, both here in our town as well as in Sacramento and elsewhere. And in reading the literature, I understand why our district is moving towards evidence-based grading. It does seem like a wonderful way to be trying to measure mastery. However, what I have heard over and over again is in the rollout, we need to be providing much more clarification, as some of my colleagues here have said, to our teachers and to our parents and to our students about what it means. We've got students who themselves have been brought up in a school system that was evaluated very differently, and it's a big transition. I also think we need to be, for this to work well, we need to be providing a lot more support to our teachers about what this looks like and how the feedback mechanisms can fit within the existing structures. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next question. What is your stance on some schools' recommendation that teachers assign no marks in lieu of Fs? How would you standardize grading policies to ensure a fair and unbiased practice? We'll start with Ms. Chu.
I think that the practice of removing Fs, I'm not supportive of the practice of moving Fs. I think that that relates to the question that we had before, in the sense that there should be clarity and transparency about how students are doing. I think the issue with removing Fs is that it masks the fact that some students are genuinely struggling with the academic material that they are working with in classrooms. And I think there should be more honesty about whether students are, in an absolute sense, struggling with material or succeeding with material. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So I'm going to be quite frank. I haven't looked into this issue in any detail, so I don't have a really great answer on it. Anything we do needs to be consistent across all our sites so that we're doing the same thing. And it needs to be consistent so that we're not doing one practice for students who know how to ask the right magic questions and a different practice for students who don't ask the right magic questions in order to get, a no mark or something removed from their transcript. So I honestly don't know whether we should do no marks or Fs, but whatever we do, we should do it extremely consistently.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
So I think here that my main question would be the concern with students who are either getting the no marks or the Fs, and to look into why that is and how we can provide them support. But I'll answer the question asked, which was that I would defer to our teachers on this, and I think we need to have a consistent policy. I think it needs to be communicated well, and I think we need to make sure there's not an information differential, so that everybody knows how to access the no marks if that is there, and if not, what that F means. And I think just as importantly, if somebody does get an F, what are the next steps for that student to take to address the fact that they have not shown mastery of that course? Because again, I think that's the core here, is we need to be addressing why is that student not able to either learn or show proficiency. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Saltzman.
I haven't had any parents, students, or teachers raise this topic with me, so I'm not sure how widespread this issue is, but I do think that there are a couple things that are important whenever we talk about grading. One, as others have said, is to make sure that we have clear, consistent standards and that everyone understands what the expectations are and what the practices are that lead to those standards. And also to make sure that we're taking into consideration the purpose of grading and where these marks or lack of marks will show up. If this is something that's going to be communicated to colleges, then I think that's something that needs to be taken into consideration. And I do agree that the most important question is, why do we have students that are not succeeding in their classes? And let's make sure we're focusing on solving that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Ms. Chu Wong.
I have heard of this issue and have heard that not all students know that no mark is an option, and so we need to make sure that all of our students are aware. And my understanding is that after a certain duration of time passes, if a student hasn't done what they need to do to receive a mark, that it turns into an F. And we have implemented MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support, which flags on different things at which a team of adults, supportive adults in the district, actually gets together and talks about what's going on with this student. We have a D and F list. We could add no mark to that list for it to be a flag, so that our staff and our adults reach out to see what's going on with this student and to make sure that they know what the time limit is, if they need extra support, what they need to do to address the no mark, just as we would want to address the D and the F. So I think we rely on those systems we built into place to work, and we make sure that all of our students know about the option to have no mark, because what we want them to do is take control and realize that they can change their future and they have the agency to do so, and then we're there to support them in that.
Thank you. Our next question is, social media has blurred the lines between online and on-campus life and impacted the way students interact with each other. What can the school district do to combat hate, reduce division, and foster unity? We will start with Ms. Kamai.
One of my campaign priorities, as mentioned, is safety, which I define broadly as investing in mental health services, special needs, as well as anti-bullying and screen use guidelines. So I think one of the things that we can do is have a very clear cell phone limit to make sure that we are at least picking a time of day where our students do not have access to screens in order to be engaging in behavior that can both distract them from learning and relationships, and also further the bullying that you're talking about. I also think that we need to take this seriously. There are many different ways to harm somebody. You can harm them physically, you can harm them verbally, and you can harm them in cyber manner. And so I think that we need to be treating these incidents very seriously. Anything that happens outside the school that still affects relationships inside the school should be within the purview of the district, and we should be making sure that we have very strong policies to address any type of bullying or social media harms. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Chu Wong.
I think we need to make sure that cell phones are out of classrooms so that students can pay attention to their teachers, but also ensure that teachers aren't policing the classroom for cell phones. But as it relates to cell phones and social media, we need to be equipping our students to understand the landscape and to understand how to be responsible users. There are plenty of nonprofits that are working on this and trying to find ways through other students peer-to-peer talking about it. I want to share an anecdote that when I went and was a career speaker at Pali, I was there for an hour, and when I got off the stage, I had allowed students to have their cell phones because I wanted an interactive presentation where they could do a poll and we could show the results. And 45 minutes in, as I discovered after, I had a student that had created a fake Instagram account for me and had messaged me and had already amassed 30 followers that were all fellow Pali students and was messaging me and tagging my husband in photos and using photos I'd only shared with them. And I know as an adult and having been through training how to shut down that account, but many students don't, and it can happen so quick. So we need to teach our students to be better with each other and be responsible, because at some point they will have real consequences.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So I have a strange relationship with social media since I've actually been on the internet and being bullied on the internet since 1988 when I was in grade 8 at the time, because as I mentioned before, I was a nerd. And so I've actually grown up on social media of all forms, starting at Usenet and moving forward to our present day systems. And we need to teach our kids how to deal with social media. I totally agree that in the classroom, we need to make sure that cell phones are not in use when they are distracting from the lessons that are being taught, and we need to develop policies to make it easy for teachers to keep those cell phones out of kids' hands in the classroom. But the big issue is outside the classroom and outside of the school environment. What controls does the district have? Well, there are all sorts of interesting case law on that. But the number one thing we can do as schools is teach our kids how to deal with these issues and how to be more kind and empathetic to each other.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Salzman.
So this issue touches on two of my priorities. One, which is around trust and transparency, and the other is around how important it is that all of our students feel safe and supported and included. On the trust and transparency side, I think it's very important that we help our students understand that trust is something that is very hard to build and very easy to break. And that is true both in the real world and the online world. And I think teaching them both citizenship in the real world and digital citizenship is absolutely crucial for us to start doing as early as possible, helping them understand what the potential harms are of social media and how it can lead to all sorts of issues in terms of how they see themselves, how they see their friends, and how they view other relationships, I think is very important. And then the other side is making sure that students understand what types of things are okay and not okay to say or do in either the real world context or the online context. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Ms. Chu.
I agree with my fellow candidates who have supported a cell phone limit in the sense that in the classroom, I believe that students should learn to appreciate and develop interpersonal skills, many of which were lost during the pandemic. But I want to make the point that we can't protect our students 24/7. And therefore, I would advocate, instead of rules and regulations about taking phones away or imposing limits on those phones, outside of the classroom, that we instead equip our students with a greater sense of critical thinking and how to identify bias in the system. We need to teach students, importantly, both within the classroom and outside of the classroom, how to be vigilant about student media. Social media. We need to encourage them to cherish and respect nuance, to respect a difference of opinion, to know that everything they read is not true, and to embrace diversity. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are your views on the implementation of the new ethnic studies curriculum in secondary schools? We'll start with Ms. Kamai.
I think ethnic studies is incredibly important. I think we need to teach it, but I think it is also incredibly important that we teach it in the right way. I will go back to my two of my priorities. One is safety, and that includes making sure that folks, if folks do not feel safe, do not feel like they belong in a classroom, if they feel targeted because of their race, religion, country of national origin, et cetera, then they cannot learn, they cannot thrive. Another one is transparency. I think it's really important that we are open and get input. This class is being piloted right now. I have heard it's going well. I look forward to hearing what the teachers have to say. I also think it's really important to get feedback from the students and from those who are not in the class as well, to make sure that we are moving forward in a way where we are coming together on our shared values. I think we are having ethnic studies in order to bring us together in our shared values, and want to make sure that is a substantive course that really does bring us together and does not cause more division.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
Ethnic studies is not only important, but it is vital for all students, and particularly those that are historically underrepresented. Studies have shown that students of color that have the opportunity to take ethnic studies improve academically across the board when they see themselves represented and understand their identity in the context of our culture and our history. I feel grateful that we've had an ethnic studies curriculum as an elective for over a decade with no issues, and that this current implementation with the pilot is an extension of that class that has been non-controversial, for which our teachers, I trust and understand, have expertise and the confidence to deliver it to their students. I'm disappointed with the pilot that we had students that wanted to take the class and would have been served by the class, and they were not able to take it. That is a real consequence of slow rolling ethnic studies, and something we should not do. This is also an opportunity for us to dive into what it looks like beyond what we're currently offering, which is not liberated and is not inclusive, but we could have a conversation and the appropriate committees to have these discussions to create standards and make a bigger opportunity out of this.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
I believe that ethnic studies is deeply important to have in our classrooms. From my own lived experience, I saw very little representation in my own academic curriculum as I was growing up. And so when I moved on to graduate studies and I saw representation of myself in those studies, I agree that it changed the trajectory of both my life and my academic passions. However, I think the implementation of ethnic studies at this juncture in terms of our global politics is it's critically important to get that right. I think it's critically important to make sure that it's a true representation of everybody's viewpoints about a number of controversial subjects. I think it's important in the sense that we should teach our students not to be afraid to have direct and open dialogue about these complex subjects. And I also think that we, in the teaching of ethnic studies, may need to confront uncomfortable realities, both about our history as a nation and globally. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colahan.
So my experience in substitute teaching in high schools and in the middle schools has taught me a lot of surprising things. And one of the things it's taught me is that if you look at the social interactions between the students in our classes, they, more often than I would expect, sort themselves by ethnic grouping when in our friend groups in our schools. And when kids tease each other, they often tease each other across social groups, and this can sometimes result in unfair teasing that points out ethnic characteristics, which is, quite frankly, bad. And so one of the things that I think is fantastic about us rolling out an ethnic studies curriculum is that it is a course that is deliberately targeted at teaching our kids empathy and teaching how to put themselves in each other's shoes to try and decrease some of the tensions across these social groups. And because of that, I think it's vitally needed. And I think that we should continue the pilot that's going on right now, and I look forward to hearing all about its successes and how it can be improved when it's presented this January.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Saltzman.
I'm glad that we have the opportunity to address this question because this is something that's come up a lot during the campaign. I've had a lot of folks express anxiety about this topic, and just so that people understand where some of that anxiety comes from, I think it's important that we understand the global context that we're currently living in. We have conflicts that are occurring very, very far from here that are causing tremendous division in some of our communities, causing some folks to feel that they're being blamed for situations that they don't have any control over. And so I don't think it's surprising that we have parents who are very concerned that their children might feel othered or in some way made to feel bad in a course that might bring politics into something. But what I'm happy to hear about is that the current ethnic studies pilot seems to be going well, and I haven't heard any issues, and I'm glad that we'll be evaluating it in January. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next question is, what can be done to support students who are behind in reading in secondary schools? We'll start with Ms. Chu Wong.
I've seen this firsthand in middle school where we have students that are in 8th grade that are reading at a 2nd grade level. I've talked to our reading specialists. We have one at every middle school, and we're lucky to have a reading TOSA or a reading specialist. And they've talked about how it is not too late for these students. They just need someone who knows how to teach reading, has been trained to do so, that is going to focus and have time to do that with them. And so this is the perfect opportunity where we need to find ways in which we can provide those supports to our students, because it is achievable. Reaching grade level in reading is achievable. We just need to make sure that they're able to access the supports that we have. And while I'm grateful we have one reading specialist at each middle school, we need to look at the caseload, because one person, if it's a large group of students that need support, that's not going to be sufficient. So we need to make sure we're properly resourcing to make sure that we're triaging and meeting students where they are so we can provide them the support that they need so that they can finally reach grade level and no longer need that support.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
I agree with my fellow candidate that I think that students in secondary school that are behind in reading need very real and concrete support. I've also spoken to a number of reading TOSAs or reading specialists in secondary school, and so I think I would start by a very practical solution, which is to increase the number of reading specialists. I think that this would give support to the idea that we need to be intellectually honest if a student is struggling, and we can't mask that struggle. I would say that similar to the points I made about maths, that student confidence and self-perception when it comes to any academic pursuit, both across math and reading, is critical. I have 4 children who read at widely different times. In fact, there was a 6-year gap in reading ability between 2 of my children of a similar age. And I would say that what helped my child, who was 6 years behind in reading in the end, was a teacher who truly believed that she could do that. And rather than linearly putting her through what might be considered age-appropriate maths, her belief in her ability to read was what got her over the hump in the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Next will be Mr. Colohan.
So the first thing we need to do to improve reading ability in secondary schools is make sure that we're doing everything possible at the elementary school level. We currently have the Every Student Reads initiative at the elementary school level, which is attempting to do that. We need to continue to provide our full support behind that program in order to make sure that we have as small a caseload as possible for our middle school TOSAs, because the kids already know how to read by the time they get there. But that, of course, will not be perfect. It will not catch all the students. And so for the students who do not successfully get to reading at grade level by the time they finish elementary schools and are still having challenges at the middle school level, we need to support them in every possible way. And I agree with what Nicole was saying, which is we need to talk to our experts, our reading TOSAs, find out what their workloads are like, and evaluate whether perhaps more resources are needed or different approaches are needed.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
So I'll answer this in two ways, one strategically and one logistically. So I think from the strategic side, we need to make sure that we're doing timely assessments for folks, identifying people early who need extra support, and we're doing ongoing communication between teachers, between grades, and even between schools, so that we are hearing from the elementary school teachers to prep for middle school, and then ongoing support from middle school to high school as well. Logistically, I think we could use the flex period that exists to really use that time. I know that we're already experimenting with ways to use that time period, but that's built into the school day to really be creative about how to give folks extra support. Actually, I come from, this is something that runs deep in my family. My mom's an English teacher, my dad's a reading specialist. So I know that there are a lot of different ways that we can help kids at different levels, and there's a lot of data out there that we can be using to offer additional support to what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, Mr. Saltzman.
I think that this is an issue that comes down to a number of different things. One is resources, another is assessment, and then the last is our approach. So in terms of resources, making sure that we have the right specialists and that we have enough of them, I think is critical. In terms of assessment, I think that it is very important that we know as soon as possible if we have a student who's struggling. The earlier that we can intervene, the better off we're going to be. And so then it comes down to strategy. And I think really there, what's most important is that we understand the science of reading. Reading is a skill that can be broken down into sub-skills. It's very important that we understand what impediments an individual student may have that's preventing them from learning how to read. And then we make sure that we have a teacher or specialist in place who can help them build up those individual components of those sub-skills and get on track. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final question is, would you be in support of returning middle school athletic teams back into school site management instead of city management? We will start with Mr. Colohan.
No. Okay, you want me to expand on that? Fine. The simple answer is, sure, I would love it if we had the management ability to do so, if we had the capacity to do so, if we had the funds to do so, if we could figure out a way of doing so. But quite frankly, doing this transition would be an incredibly challenging problem, both logistically and politically, and also management-wise. And I'm not sure that organizationally we have the capacity to take on that challenge right now. There's so many more important things that we should be working on. We've talked about a lot of those issues tonight, and I think it would end up being organizationally a giant distraction. And so, no, not at this time.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Saltzman.
I think this question is important for us to consider, not necessarily because the right answer is for us to bring middle school athletics back into the purview of the school district, but because the current situation doesn't seem to be working well. And I've heard from a lot of different parents and students who feel like they aren't being given the opportunity to pursue activities that are a great way for them to build teamwork, build new social connections with peers, blow off steam in terms of the getting away from the stresses of school. There's so many benefits to participation in sports. And so I think what we need to figure out is why is it that the current system isn't working well for our students and our families, and then find some creative solutions to solve that problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu.
I do support the return of middle school athletics back to the school site rather than in the hands of the city. I think I work on the principle that it is best to empower people to make decisions about issues that affect them most directly and most deeply. In speaking to parents, students, and teachers who advocate on this issue, I believe that they feel that the city's interests are not aligned with the middle school students who want to emphasize emphasize athletics and get involved in athletics. I think that people operate best when they feel empowered and they're given autonomy. And I think that there have been a number of sort of unfortunate situations where parents and teachers and students have been driven to find other solutions, alternative solutions, and to take those solutions underground. And therefore, I think it would be better to bring it back in the purview of the school district. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
This is one of those instances where it's so easy to find problems. And particularly the way it used to be was the problem for equity because it mattered if you were on your computer at exactly the right time. Now with the lottery, it's slightly better, but now the families that have the means, if they don't win the lottery to participate in city-run sports, their families with the means will go to private clubs and they will still have the opportunity to pursue those athletics. So this is also not great. I think this is a complex problem. We need to sit down and think about what's right to be able to find equity and allow our students to have access. I'm concerned that the problems that the city has had will plague us also as a school district. Staffing does not necessarily all of a sudden solve itself, which coaching staff has been an issue for the city, and I don't know that it will become necessarily easier when we bring it in-house. I know we have problems at my nonprofit finding staff. It is hard to find staff for school programs. So I want to make sure that whatever we do, we're thoughtful, and I want to acknowledge that the way it currently is run needs to change for equity and to ensure that our students have the opportunities that they need and want.
Thank you. Finally, Ms. Kamai.
I think it's fitting to end with this as a final question. I think it ties up a lot of what we've been talking about earlier with academic stress, mental health, social media issues, and community. And I think having kids have access to after-school athletics in middle school can address a lot of what we were talking about with all of those issues. I'd be open to thinking creatively in any way possible to improve the situation for our kids so that more kids can access athletics, middle school athletics, if they choose to do so. I think right now, that there's a lot of the system is unnecessarily confusing and unnecessarily burdensome for many folks to be able to access sports for their kids. And we see different kind of parallel processes popping up. And I think that really, if we're thinking about what would serve our kids best, would be to have a community athletic program that would be accessible for all. And whether that's under the purview of the school district or the city, I'm open to discussing so that we can improve it for our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now have 1 minute per candidate for closing statements. We'll start with Mr. Saltzman.
The Palo Alto School District serves an incredibly diverse community. Our students have a wide range of strengths and challenges, and we want all our students to find the right path and achieve their goals. The school system is incredibly complex, and the role of the board is not to solve every problem that arises, but it is the board's job to guide our schools into the future and help shape our district's culture. Come December, we will have 3 brand new members on our school board. The perspectives and experience those board members bring to the table will inform their decision-making. As a parent of 3 kids who has been involved in our schools at all levels and also has experience with special education, I think I have a valuable perspective to offer. And I hope you'll give me a chance to represent our community by voting for me between now and November 5th. Thank you, and thank you to PTAC, our moderators, and our organizers.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Kamai.
I want to thank all of you for listening in. I want to mention that I'm here because I care, and I know that everybody listening in is here because you care as well. We've talked a lot about different things that we bring to the table, and I have budget experience in nonprofit. I have legal experience. I have experience representing children, good governance experience, but really I am here because I care, because I want to bring us together on our shared values. I want to set the tone for discourse and set the expectations for how we interact, how we listen to each other, how we open dialogue. I'm proud to have the endorsements of the teachers union, of the staff union, of many of our currently elected and officials and formerly elected officials, and look forward to working with all of you in the months to come. Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Colohan.
So I want to start off by asking everyone to please go to chrisforschoolboard.com And the reason is because there's so much more I'd love to say. Like, I'd love to tell you about my priorities of improving elementary math, of increasing trust in our school district, of improving our budget transparency. I'd love to tell you about all the endorsements I've gotten. Over 100 people have endorsed me, including our classified employees union in the district and many teachers. And actually, there are loads of teachers who support me because I've been diving into our schools and working with them every day to help our schools become better, but they don't necessarily want to publicly sign up to endorse. And it's because of that track record of serving our schools as a PTA leader, as a substitute teacher, and the experience I bring as a manager, as experienced manager, I think I'd be really good on the board. And so I'm hoping that you will look at all of this, go to chrisforschoolboard.com, and decide that you want to vote for me as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Ms. Chu Wong.
First, I'd like to thank PTAC, everyone involved in putting this forum together, and the student moderators and the students that participated in creating these questions tonight. And now I'm hoping some of our high school students are watching because this is for you. I ran for school board in 2022 and I lost. I've lost more times than I've won, and every time I got back up. And in the last 2 years since I lost, I dug in to do the work, and I am better for it, and I'm back. And this is what we need to be instilling in our students, that failure is not bad, it's good. I've transitioned careers from being an attorney to learning how to code, to joining a startup in a technical role, to having my own startup, to doing a deal with Google, and then leaving that to do purpose-driven work in a nonprofit for educational equity. This is more what their life will look like if they follow their passions, if we redefine what success looks like and open their eyes to them following what they're passionate in, because it will lead them to doing great things. And so this is for all of you. I failed, I got back up, you can too, and I wish you the best of luck, and I know you'll do well.
Thank you. Finally, we have Ms. Chu.
Thank you to our hosts this evening, to PTAC, and also to our student moderators. I think the range of questions that this panel were presented with this evening indicate the complexity of issues facing us both as a school board and in anyone who participates in this district, whether they are a parent, a student, or a teacher. I think we live in fascinating times, both in this city, this wider community, and also globally. And I think that the range of these issues indicate how important it is to represent all voices in the many diverse issues that we've discussed tonight. And therefore, I think that this has emboldened me to continue with my campaign priority, which is to change culture, to drive community dialogue, to build consensus in the complexity of this district, and to bring these many diverse voices to the table and to find practical solutions that I feel will meet the greatest number of people in this district. Similarly, I encourage you to go to voterowena.com if you would support some of these priorities, and I encourage you to participate in our democratic system by voting on November the 5th. Thank you.
Thanks to everyone for your involvement in this forum. Thanks to everyone for your involvement in this forum. On behalf of the Palo Alto Council of PTAs, we would like to thank all of the candidates for the dedication you show in running for the school board and participating in this forum. We really are thankful. We would also like to thank our audience for your engagement, and both in watching the forum today and for submitting questions beforehand. Lastly, we want to thank our high school moderators for stepping up to this task, and the PTAC and our organizers, our fellow organizers, for making this important event happen. We would like to remind everyone that there will be another Palo Alto Board Candidate Forum coming up on October 18th, co-sponsored by Palo Alto Council of PTAs, Palo Alto Community Advisory Committee for Special Education, the Latino Parent Network, LPN, and Parent Advocates for Student Success. It will be focused on special education and educational equity. We hope that you can submit questions for the forum and join us again on Zoom. Thank you all, and hope you have a great evening. Thank you.